Well, welcome to another episode of the Grazing Sheep Podcast. I'm your host, Big Tom Perkins, along with Dr. Cameron Meyerly. And again, today we're joined by Dr. Andrew Weaver. On the last episode, we were talking about line breeding, and I got quite a few inquiries, I guess, on how do you start line breeding. So we thought we'd have Dr. Weaver come back, and we figured we'd pick his brain between Cameron and Dr. Weaver. We think maybe we can find some answers here because I don't have any.
Did get a
Well, thanks
couple
for having me
comments.
back.
Yeah, I got a couple comments. They said, "Man, you guys cannot just have Andrew and Cameron on there talking back and forth because it's going to put me to sleep if Tom's not in there making his wisecracks." And thought that was pretty funny. But yeah, it was. We got done with that, and it's like, oh man, what did we even talk about? And then I was listening, back to the episode, and it's like, oh, it was fun discussion, and it's something that I think is on the minds of a lot of producers in how we go about it. And even those, I think there are very few individuals that are doing it and doing it to a level that they're satisfied with, or doing it to a level that they could tell you how confident they are in the way they're doing it. And then I think more importantly, why they're choosing to do it. And it's something that it shouldn't be done just on a whim. It should be done with purpose and intention. And so hopefully this provides some insight on the thought process on how to go about it with intentional breeding schemes when it comes to line breeding. So I was, and that also led me down another rabbit hole of watching some presentations, and I heard a phrase in the one presentation. The only difference between line breeding and inbreeding is an L and an E, and so and so that one I thought was pretty clever. But yeah, so Andrew, when we're thinking about uh, moving forward, and we think we found an elite individual, or better yet, an elite family of genetic material. What's our first step, maybe in finding those sheep initially, and then pursuing a line breeding plan?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think the first step is you got to figure out what is that ideal individual. And I don't think the same it's probably the same individual for all of us. It's probably going to depend on your operation and your customer base and what you're trying to do. But if you can't identify the ideal individual, then I would probably not recommend you pursue a line breeding program, because if you remember from last week, as you start line breeding, you're going to exaggerate all of those traits, both good and bad. And so if you pick an individual to maybe start lining up to, and that individual doesn't possess as close to what is maybe ideal for you at that time as possible, you're just going to potentially make things worse. So you need to identify what's ideal. And I guess that could be for a particular trait that you're trying to, really emphasize in your operation and provide to your customers. Maybe it could be a specific trait within a specific line. If you're a large enough operation, there's many operations and examples out there where, maybe one operation has several different lines of animals that are all line bred back to specific individuals that possess certain traits. So maybe you have a group of animals that are lined up for parasite resistance and another one for maternal traits. And the end goal is to market those animals to be crossed with one another to get both parasite resistance and maternal traits. And so it could be that, it could be maybe that what you might say a very complete individual that possesses positive attributes for the majority of traits across the board, maybe not perfect in any of them, but possesses a lot of those traits. So there's any number of reasons to start line breeding. But I think we need to first think about what is that ideal animal that we're trying to produce, and what, maybe Tom or Cam, what is that individual in your operations?
That's a great question. And as you were talking about that, it got me thinking. And before we answer that question, do EBVs offer an additional opportunity or an easier selection process in finding that individual? Because we have a quantified metric of what those traits are. And so does that give us a level of confidence in selecting all of those phenotypic traits that we appreciate, and then also all of the genetic attributes, or a lot of the genetic attributes that we'd like to implement in offspring down the road? Does that provide some confidence to us?
I think so. It's an added level of accuracy in our selection programs, and certainly if we're seed stock breeders and trying to provide specific traits to our customer base, I would love to. The fact that we know what the fecal egg count breeding value is, and I can strategically line up sheep that possess extremely low fecal egg count EBVs and have high confidence that the resulting progeny will also have low fecal egg count breeding values. That is reassurance to our customers, and we can, if I say this animal has a low fecal egg count, and so did its parents and the grandparents, and you just follow the pedigree back, and all of those individuals have low fecal egg counts. Well, that's an added layer of confidence that animal is truly going to pass on those genes to its offspring.
Okay, and it's a great answer for the EBV side of it. I also wanted to ask, in breeds of sheep where we don't have EBVs, and I don't know that there's a reason to have them. I know you're familiar with that club lamb industry, the section of our, or segment of our industry that puts a lot of pressure on phenotypic selection. Could we use EBVs in there? Sure. Do we need to? It's a lot of work for some results that we're probably not going to use, because at the end of the day, that's not what we're selecting for. But when we're thinking about phenotypic selection, I guess what's the mindset from that segment of the industry? In your opinion, why are we seeing extensive line breeding in that part of the sheep industry?
Yeah, I think it's just that added confidence and predictability. You increase that homozygosity, so you increase the number of genetic alleles, pairs, forms of that gene that are similar, and so by doing that, you're more likely to have a consistent set of offspring that possess those traits that you're interested in. And so, if you have an animal that is really heavy muscled, thick, hard handling, and possesses those traits that maybe for the show industry is desirable, you line up animals that possess those traits, and you're probably going to get some offspring that are also pretty thick and hard handling, and are going to do those things well. So it just adds that level of confidence and predictability. So whether you're using some of the other genetic tools we have from a more production sense, or you're just looking at some of those phenotypic traits, the risk of the phenotypic traits is it environmental or is it genetic? And if they're possessing those traits because they're environmental, you can line them up all day long, and you're not going to see any benefit to that. And so that's what we need to be careful of if we're just looking at phenotypic traits.
Yeah, and I do think we don't have accuracy values on those phenotypic traits. Like, they're not going to exist because it's not a quantified metric. And so I have plenty of examples of, those discussions with breeders that maybe they get a lamb a ewe lamb that doesn't hit the phenotypic requirement of what they would normally keep, but pedigree wise, they're willing to keep that one around because they know that those genetics will throw those thick, hard handling individuals. And so, I mean, there's plenty of examples. How many blackface ewes have you seen that do not make show ring? They themselves are not show ring quality specimens. However, because of the pedigree and because of that careful breeding behind them, will bred to the right male, the right ram, will go out and produce very competitive individuals because that pedigree is predictable, because we know, or we have a increased ability to guess what those offspring are going to do. I think those examples are really fun to see. And again, they're sheep that if you didn't know the background on, would get overlooked pretty quickly. from a phenotypic evaluation.
Right. And I think even for some of our production traits, maybe that we don't have breeding values for yet. So like feed efficiency, for example, we're doing some feed efficiency work. We're lining up sheep that possess, positive, favorable feed efficiency values that we don't have an EBV for it. They're just phenotypic records of feed efficiency, but it's the best we have right now. And my thought process is the only chance we have of determining, genetic potential and genetic change is to line those individuals up as close as possible and try to find those that possess the genes for feed efficiency. And so we started that and measuring resulting offspring and trying to develop a data set to show whether that works or not. So we'll find out here over the next few years what that looks like.
And one of the fun things when we're thinking about line breeding, we talked a little bit last time on the value of that maternal individual, the value of the female in that line breeding equation, because it takes both. Obviously,
Right.
This is not new news here. Takes a male and a female. We know with that mitochondrial DNA and the feed efficiency side, we're assuming a lot of it is maternally driven, and so it does provide an opportunity to play around with that maternal side and lining up that maternal side and evaluate those offspring for a trait like feed efficiency, which I think is a great example. So you'd ask, what individual do you see that has value, and it's enough value that you'd want to either try your best to recreate that individual, or at least propagate those genetics in a more predictable fashion. And so, Tom, I was curious with Andrew's question, do you have any females that you'd say, yeah, these are ones that I would take 100 of? That tends to be my phrase, like, oh, I'd take 100 of those, because they're easy keeping, know what they're doing, fit the bill on every aspect.
I do. And I guess what I've done in the past is, when I find, lambs like that and ewes like that, I go back through and look at how I got those, and I try to recreate that same breeding again. But I've never thought about trying to lock that in by breeding those ewes back to the same sire.
Yeah, and I think there's some
But that
debate
was
as to do you line breed to the sheep that you wish you had 1,000 of, or do you line breed to animals that possess a specific trait that you want to strategically infuse into a commercial breeding program?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And that, on the second point, that line breeding or creating consistent genetic lines for the commercial side is something I can speak to. We've combined flocks with another breeder, and they had a really nice, like, what we'd consider a foundation ewe, like, does everything right, produces really nice offspring. She had a set of triplet ram lambs last year, and when I see triplet ram lambs out of a sheep, a ewe that's doing her job, a ram that was selected for extreme parasite resistance, he could do some other things a little bit better on his profile, but 3 really nice individuals. All I see is breeding opportunity. So I now have 3 like pedigreed individuals that in a ram lamb, maybe I get 15 to 20 ewes bred. All of a sudden now I've got the opportunity to go 45 to 60 ewes and have hopefully a more consistent group of lambs. If I take it a step further and put the sire in with that group, which is what we did, and so now we've got the capacity to add another 40 to 50 ewes in. So we've got a set of 100 ewes that's being bred to a ram and 3 of his sons that are out of 1 ewe. So that was something, I see this opportunity for genetic lines, and we're trying to propagate some of these genetic lines. We bred that ewe right back to the same ram. She had another set of triplets, 2 rams and a ewe. And my thought is we'll evaluate those 2 rams, figure out where they fit, and now we have an increased breeding capacity on a genetic line that I understand there's variation between those individuals, even in coming out of the same litter. And there's going to be variation year to year. Those genes don't line up and match up the exact same every single year. But can we produce a more consistent lamb crop when I have a set of rams that are out of 1 sire and 1 dam? And that's a long-term kind of plan, and it takes time unless we start to implement some of those reproductive technologies. If I could flush that ewe to that same ram and I end up with, say, 15 progeny out of that same mating in 1 year, all of a sudden I've taken, and say half of them are ram lambs. So we'll say 8 ram lambs. If she's producing 2 ram lambs out of a set of triplets every year, that's 4 years worth of breeding time. It's, I mean, 4 breeding seasons, and I've got my genetic packages sitting right there, and I know all those won't be breeding pieces, or maybe shouldn't be. The other option, so that's one example.
So do you plan, I'll interrupt here. Do you plan
Yeah.
on taking any, maybe grandsons or granddaughters out of that ewe from that particular mating, and then crossing those back to one another to put that ewe in the pedigree multiple times?
Yeah. So where I see opportunity is that triplet daughter. And so ear tag 814 is that sheep. She has 3 or 4 daughters in the flock already. Those 3 or 4 daughters were bred to that same ram this past year to then hopefully keep sons out of. So we're trying to expand that group of, she had 2 rams this year. Well, she has 4 daughters in production that all tie back to the same dam, to that 814 ewe, but they're out of different rams. But I'm bringing in this additional ram, this other ram, so that all of those progeny stem back to one common ewe, and they also go back immediately to that ram, that parasite-resistant ram. So that's one option. I don't know if that's would count in that line breeding scheme, but the goal is consistency. We're trying to produce commercial lambs that A, have parasite resistance, and B, have that performance in them to go out and work on grass. And if I can, the more consistent of a set of rams I can turn out, my opinion is the better I'm going to be in terms of lamb crop.
Right. Where I think a huge opportunity is with the commercial sector is if you can find with the seed stock breeders that are, maybe they have, let's just say line A, and line A is maybe lined up to that you were just talking about that possesses performance on grass and parasite resistance. Well, maybe you also have a seed stock producer that runs, you could call it line B. Maybe it's a similar kind of breeding scheme where you're lining up to animals, but maybe they possess maybe some more carcass attributes, thickness and conformation, and the ability to go and grade well at these sales and sell some high value market lambs. Well, then you could take within the commercial sector, you then take and maybe 1 year you use line A rams and get a bunch of daughters out of line A rams. And then you take those line A daughters and you cross them on rams from line B. And now you have resulting offspring that in that case, it'd be kind of almost like a terminal cross. But you'd have a very consistent set of offspring that could be marketed that should work on grass, but also possess some market quality. And so I think you think about how you strategically take those lines and then cross those to one another to be able to achieve that ideal animal that you would take 100 of. That's
Right.
why I thought you take these lines and where that the ewe that we would want 100 of or 1,000 of, in my mind, is a strategic cross of inbred lines that for specific traits.
Right. And so on that line B aspect, coming up with that second genetic line to then use, because the goal is for us right now, the goal is producing ewe lambs for expansion. And so that's great until you need something to breed all that next generation to. And
So
so,
maybe line B or line C is a prolificacy line
right. And
that you can
so,
infuse back in to get some lambing percentage.
yeah, exactly. And that's something that, as I mentioned, that ram really does a really nice job on the parasite resistant side of things. Could use some help on both growth and some prolificacy numbers, where we do have another ram that excels in that in that line. And that was gone. We used him in the NSIP flock. He was a ram lamb last year. And again, it was intentional matings of families was really what we focused on. So not necessarily what the numbers looked like or what they were going to result in. The ewe that comes to mind that was a sheep that I started with from the commercial flock is we just called number 32. She's got a big yellow cattle tag that is a 32 and a little skittish, a little wild, but always fat, never needs dewormed, always has twins. Just when I think of commercial female, that's where my mind goes. And so what's exciting is she had a set of twins, a ram lamb and a ewe lamb out of we'll say ram B, and her daughters 2042 and 2043 who were out of a ram that we used when we were getting started, both had twin ram lambs out of ram B. So now I've got 4 ram lambs out of those 2 daughters plus her ram lamb. So I've got 5 ram lambs that all tie back to that number 32 ewe that I would like to use on top of ram A genetic line ewe lambs to proliferate that number 32 phenotype performance with the added benefit of a ram that I know what his strengths are. And then just figuring
Right.
out,
And
like,
I think,
do you go back to that same, do you just keep taking 32 and her daughters and keep breeding them to ram B so that you end up with this flock of rams that they're all out of the same ram and have a common dam in the pedigree.
right. And for all the listeners out there, this might all sound super confusing, and how in the world do you keep track of all
Yeah,
this?
we don't have paper in front of it, so
Right.
it's hard to explain.
I do think from the standpoint of simplicity, I think colored ear tags are a really kind of easy, straightforward way to keep track of these lines. So you could have like the green line sheep, blue line sheep, yellow line sheep, and all the sheep within that line maybe get the same ear tag color. And then within the commercial flock, when you cross those animals, if you have let's say if you have a ewe with a green tag, well, if you have a ewe with a green tag, that means she's going to get crossed to a ram from the yellow line, because you know that the greens crossed on the yellows possess, specific, profile of traits. And now you're just lining up colors and strategically organizing and ordering colors to a pedigree. And that can be done when that lamb is in the jug. You see that ewe has, well, when they go into breeding groups, all the green tag ewes go into one breeding group, all the yellow tag ewes go into one breeding group. The respective rams get turned out with each. And then in the lambing jug, okay, that ewe has a green tag in her ear. I'm going to put a red tag in the resulting lamb's ear. And I know that the red tags are green tags on yellow tags, or however you want to work it. I think you can pick a handful of colors and keep track of those colors a lot easier than you can try to keep track of line A, B, C, D, E, and this one's parasite resistance, and this is this trait and that trait. It can all get very confusing very quickly.
Yeah, and that's something until I have that Tapari system, maybe someday if I'm hit the lottery, um, I can sort those chute side pre-breeding. I don't need my piece of paper. I'm just sitting there at the gate with the dog in the back pushing sheep up, and I can sort those sheep, and I know where those ewes are going and what rams they're going to go in with. When we're thinking about Tom, your flock, and this
Yep.
was something when we were trying to think of examples of a line breeding scheme. There's one ram on here that we've talked about quite a bit. He's even seen some social media popularity, and that's Curtis, because he's been all over the place. Um, his his prolific EBPs have held up. Parasite resistance better than breed average. It's held up. It hasn't completely tanked, and like in a lot of rams we see, and those daughters. I've told you multiple times. Whenever you're ready to move that sheep, let me know, because I've got daughters in the flock that are out of that ram that I'm just a very, very big fan of. Those are some other sheep. Andrew, your comment on which ones are the ones that are doing it. Those Curtis daughters for me are doing it and doing it at a high level. So you now have a lot of these Curtis daughters,
Yep.
and a lot of these Curtis daughters then have another generation under them. You had mentioned a couple weeks back, you've got a 205 ram. It's just
Yep.
an arbitrary number. Some of those 205 ewe lambs are out of Curtis daughters.
Yep.
And so, my thought is taking Curtis back on to 205 daughters that have a Curtis dam. And so now you've got Curtis on the sire side as the sire of that next generation of offspring.
Yep.
You also have Curtis on the dam side as the grandsire on the dam side of that ewe lamb that you're going to be breeding. Yeah, and this is what's fun is you now have the numbers that it's not 4 sheep that you're breeding that way. You have a full group of ewes that you could mate that way with the intent. This is not line breeding for line breeding's sake. My thought is, he was born in 2017.
Yep.
He's 7 years old. Maybe you get 3 more years out of him. You could also walk out to the barn and he's dead tomorrow. That's just the unfortunate reality of raising livestock.
Yep.
And so I would be in the mindset of propagating the replacement. And instead of going somewhere else and finding the sheep with a completely different genetic background that models what the sheep is doing and doing well, is to try to recreate it myself. And so for you, you've got those genetics. What's the approach to trying to recreate a genetic piece through line breeding?
I don't know. That's what has me so baffled with that. It would be great to end up with a bunch of sons that have the same, traits that Curtis has, and know that they're kind of locked in. But, I don't know how many misses you're going to end up with as well.
And that's a fair point. And of the misses, I guess the goal is through line breeding to develop that one individual that matches as closely as what the sire is, what that genetic potential and genetic line we're trying to develop, trying to get it as close to that as possible. And that, unfortunately, the clock is ticking when it comes, because again, they have a lifespan.
Yep.
And we can't use them and then wait 4 years to see if, oh yeah, that worked. Because in 4 years, in reality, that ram will no longer be with us. Unless you take him and get him collected, and then you got a freezer full of, not an actual freezer, but a cryogenic tank full of insurance policy. on him via frozen semen, like you've got a short window to kind of capitalize on what that ram offers.
Yeah, I think
Andrew, do you have any thoughts on how you'd go about trying to salvage or conservation plan? I know we don't work in the Columbus Zoo, but those guys are doing that all the time.
Right. I mean, you think about if you take a son and a daughter out of the same ram and cross two half sibs, you're going to create an animal that has the same maternal and paternal grandsire. And so you're already lining things up pretty close. And then if you strategically take those and line those back up to other sons and daughters, you can, over a couple generations, create an individual that's a large part of its pedigree is all one individual. With that, you're going to, I would guess you're going to end up with a number that maybe don't turn out. Your inbreeding is going to be pretty high by that point. And so there may be some deleterious effects from that. But you may have a few individuals that are as close to, they're not clones, but they're as close to that through, a natural breeding system as you can get. And if those work, they're going to breed consistently. Their pedigree is very similar, going to be very similar on both sides. And they're going to breed pretty consistent. So there's opportunity there. And if there's that one individual that you want to recreate as best possible, that could certainly be done. I'm not necessarily going to advocate for lining up that close all the time. I think if we keep it at the grandsire grandam or even the great grandsire great grandam level, you're a little bit safer in terms of keeping inbreeding low, but then strategically keeping some of those similar genetics together. And so that's probably the more sustainable approach, rather than continuing to cross half sibs. Your inbreeding is going to run pretty high at that point, and there's a chance of some reproductive issues and other problems arising. We know that a lot of our reproductive traits are those that have the greatest effect from inbreeding depression. So we're going to see lower lambing rates, lower lamb survival, and that can certainly be an issue. As a seed stock breeder, it's something we need to manage and maybe take a little bit of for the sake of improving certain traits and the consistency of those traits through a strategic line breeding program. If I'm a commercial producer, and I mentioned this on last week's episode, if you're a commercial producer, I by no means recommend you using a line breeding program. You should stay as outcrossed as possible. You should actually use crossbreeding. If you're a commercial producer, you should maintain as much heterozygosity as possible, because all that's going to do is result in improved performance, improved fertility, improved lambing rates and survival, thriftiness, and total pounds of lamb produced and available to market. So if you're a commercial producer, I think strategic use of line bred animals to create that outcross and that heterozygosity is a beneficial thing. If you're a seed stock producer, then I think this conversation pertains to you and how you can start strategically lining up those pedigrees to make and those lines for those certain traits.
So we are coming up close on our time. So would it be fair to say that when you're line breeding, you are accepting the risk or just the fact that maybe half of these are not going to be any good at all, but you're willing to do that because of the other half that may come out to be superior to what you had prior or equal to what you had prior, and that you're going to lock those genetics in.
Right. I think it's fair to say that some are, you may get horns, you may get poor fertility, you may get some of those genetic conditions that we're trying to select against. That those will arise, but you may also end up with individuals that are homozygous for not having it either. And if we just quantify that, and be careful about how we're breeding those animals. There's opportunity to capitalize on elite traits, as long as we're cautious of what's coming along with them.
Mm-hmm.
And the nice thing is, if they do end up with horns or that lower fertility, that one's a little bit harder because we don't necessarily see lower fertility until we're down the road. But the ones with horns are the ones that don't meet our phenotypic requirements for breeding individuals. Mount Hope will still pay you for them,
Yep.
regardless of how line bred they are.
Yep. That's the truth of it. So we are coming up on our time. We thank you for listening to another episode of the Grazing Sheep Podcast. If you got any questions or comments, you can reach out to me at bigtomperkins@gmail.com. There's a Facebook page. You can go on there and put comments. There's a YouTube channel. We're trying to get that up and going, and with a slow internet, it takes a while to get all those videos on there. But Andrew, we want to thank you for coming on again and giving us more to think about and some pretty good answers in there.
Thanks for having me.
It's always fun discussion.
Absolutely. So
Lots
we'll
to
catch
think
up
about.
with you guys. You're heading to North Carolina today there, Cam, aren't you?
I am. Yep, we've got the next round of targeted grazing workshops through American Land Board. Got another packed classroom full of people that are really excited to grow the U.S. sheep industry and recapture market share. So it's exciting. Should be good.
Well, you have safe travels. And Andrew, I guess you're going to be putting up with Cam because I think he's going to stay with you, is he not?
Yep.
So it's going to be the Andrew and Cam show.
There'll be lots of sheep discussion. I'm
Lots
sure
of
of that.
Lots of sheep discussion. So, all right. Well, you guys have a good weekend. It's been good catching up with you.
You too, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
All right. Bye.